with well-known political activist Leonard Tim Hector. Don't go anywhere. CaribNation is up next. Welcome to CaribNation. My name is David Hines. On a recent visit to Antigua, we caught up with Antiguan politician Tim Hector. Tim Hector has been part of the political process in Antigua for almost 30 years. Tim Hector belongs to a generation of Caribbean activist intellectuals that includes Walter Rodney, Lloyd Bess, George Odlum, Maurice Bishop, Trevor Monroe, and Clive Thomas. Born in Antigua in 1942, Tim was influenced by the American Black Power movement while studying in Canada. On his return to Antigua, he quickly plunged into the intellectual and political life of his country. He founded the Antigua-Caribbean Liberation Movement, through which he has been an advocate of Pan-Africanism, Black Power, working class liberation, and Caribbean unity. Although well known as a political activist, Tim is also a historian, cricket writer, and journalist. He is the editor of the most popular newspaper in Antigua, The Outlet. But before we get into the interview with Tim, we'll take a short break. Don't go anywhere. CaribNation will be right back. Hector.
Well, good to meet you again.
All right, and welcome to CaribNation. Well, you've been involved in Antiguan and Caribbean politics, black politics for what, 30 years?
Thereabouts.
All right. Tell us how it all started.
Well, that started, I would think, way back when I was a youngster. The Federation had started in 1958. I was 16, and by a peculiar stroke, they decided to have a debate among the islands. And I happened to have been chosen for the grammar school here in Antigua. And the other person debating against me was a chap called Dr. Walter Rodney later. Mm-hmm. And we had a tremendous debate. I think they decided that nobody won the debate, which is the only time I believe Walter might not have been the victor in a debate. And long friendship grew. We kept corresponding on questions of the Federation and so on. Even from that age, both of us were, I think, just doing A-levels. And that led to our question of critiquing the Federation and critiquing Caribbean politics. And when I went abroad to Canada, he went to UWI and then to London. That relationship kept, but we in Canada then formed a group and started functioning, out of which we eventually got the Black Writers Conference and so on, those famous things which happened. But we started the Caribbean Conference Committee in 1967. Late Alfred Roberts, mm-hmm. myself, and a number of other people started these things in Canada. And we brought West Indians from all over. You know,
the Black Writers Conference you're talking about was the same Black Writers Conference Walter Rodney had gone to, and
correct.
When he came back to Jamaica,
he was banned. Right. So okay. We were the organizers of all that. Okay. We had brought C.L.R. James before, Lamming, and then Walter and a number of other people came together. So that had posited us in a position that we were very active as students, what we were going to do when we go home. Mm-hmm. So that, you know, my premise was that I have to continue doing what I was doing. So I just continued on. As I came home, Antigua was in turmoil at the time. There had been a pretty serious upheaval, which I played some part in 1960.
Let's talk about that upheaval in the late 1960s here, because bearing in mind that the late 1960s in the Caribbean was a period of upheavals. I mean, Jamaica with the Rodney riots, 1970, the upheaval in Trinidad, and of course here in Antigua.
Well, yeah. that was interesting, because a lot of people credit the Trinidad thing with the beginning of this black movement, whereas in fact in both 68 in Jamaica and in Antigua, there is this movement. Dr. Williams in his book Columbus to Castro does credit Antigua with the start of that movement. It was a question that we came to recognize that political independence had come to some territories in the Caribbean, but it was more sham than substance, that we had taken over the positions vacated by the colonials, and we continue to do more or less the same thing. The structure of the economy remained the same, the structure of society remained the same, the relation of people to things, that is, the things productive, remained the same, and that there was no real fundamental change. One or two people found a little mobility by virtue of education, But other than that, things were static. So that the question now was how to transform these economies and transform these societies. And that we had to recognize that the failure of independence meant that no single Caribbean territory, Cuba inclusive, is viable by itself. It is a thing which every single Caribbean government refuses to acknowledge, that we are not viable as separate entities. It is not an accident that we have been structurally adjusted from Guyana in the south to, if you want to go as far as Jamaica in the north or wherever, the Bahamas, right down the chain of islands, this structural adjustment has taken place, be it in the American Virgin Islands, or the US, or the British Virgin Islands, Montserrat as a colony, all of them have been structurally adjusted. It says that these territories by themselves are not viable. Yet still we continue these insular thrones on which these little kings and sometimes queens of the Caribbean sit, and they continue this little separation, and our cricketers continue to show that it is in that unity that something happens, right? That it is that cricket is always perfect, is always good, and there are a number of people who felt that we will continue winning forever, but that is not possible as cricket ceases to be a game, right? We will lose, we will win. But the point about it, it showed the genius of the West Indian people when once united. That is what cricket in the period showed. People credit Clive Lyde and Viv Richards and so on, who were the stars of the occasion. But it was the genius of the West Indian people who kept these cricketers going, right, at great sacrifice to the population. People think that sponsorship takes care of West Indies cricket and so on. That's what you see at the top. But underneath of it, what happens? When the fella is coming up, who prepares the pitches? Who fits him out? Who gives him clothes? Who gives him the encouragement? It's the people who do all these things in order to propel this thing forward. And so you notice that you had these little insular little territories, all being structurally adjusted. And the question is how to bring them to some point of unity. We had hoped when we formed the Antigua-Caribbean Liberation Movement that by the name we were saying, look, we were just a branch of the Caribbean Liberation Movement. And we had hoped that we would have developed linkages between the parties and so on. But even among the left, the tendency to remain separate and not to function, each responding to his own electoral demand, and etc., we were unable to, one, raise the money to create the unity, and two, we are also incapable of developing a spirit that would have risen above the need for capital.
You mentioned the ACLM. Let's go back to 1968 and the time you came back and the People's Aid. For the purposes of our audience who may not know what that was all about.
That was a dramatic moment in the history of Antigua. Right? Antigua was doing something that has not been done in any other territory. It was changing from a sugar economy, an absolute sugar economy, to an absolute tourist economy. In every other island you will find that sugar still remains as a 10%, 20% GDP, etc., or something like that. Antigua made an absolute change. Now you have to remember that this is also the product of the Cuban Revolution. With the Cuban Revolution, a number of American investors who would normally have invested in the hotel industry in Cuba then started to invest in Eastern Caribbean. And so they moved over, but these were small investors. These are not Hyatt or Marriott or any of these people, or Hilton or Sheraton. These are small American investors who had been knocked off by the corporate movement in the United States and the end of free enterprise as individual enterprise in the United States, which doesn't exist. What you have is corporate enterprise at best, right? If you don't have, more or less a corporate capitalist culture in the United States at the moment. And so they came here, they were small investors, and therefore they needed absolute guarantees. Government had to give them free land, tax-free, duty-free. Just so they capital for them. Our government went into that process. Quite interestingly, people bought hotel sites here for $150.
You are kidding?
Yes, the Prime Minister once boasted about it on television. The former Prime Minister, V.C. Bird, once boasted that a man came here with about $1,000 and now he owns a hotel. Right? He had no more than $1,000, but he gave him 10 acres of beach land, which he could go and borrow the money in a bank and set himself up the hotel. It never occurred to him that he was speaking to people who he's supposed to be representing. He never gave them that opportunity. Right? So that here you had this tremendous absence of faith in the local people at any level to do anything other than to continue with civil service posts. Nothing else. The conception of the colonial government became the conception of the independent government. We would hold the civil service force, and occasionally they will dignify us with the term consultant. whenever you were suitably qualified consultant to this or that. But in terms of having a share and developing even a national economy with a free enterprise basis, that never happened in any Caribbean country. I mean, Caribbean countries like to think of themselves as capitalist countries, but none of them are accumulating any capital for any expansion. Foreigners are accumulating the capital for repatriation, and so that we are guaranteed to remain underdeveloped and always to be extending our hands outwards to look for people to come and develop the country.
So you were responding to that in 1969?
We were responding to that. Now what happened in that is that to carry out that process, there's one trade union in the country. A very strange thing had happened. Antigua is a very peculiar place, right? There was one syndicate of estates in Antigua and one sugar factory. So the foreign owners were in one group. And that led to a corresponding formation of one single trade union which confronted the syndicate, which is what it was called, the Antigua Syndicate Estates, which owned the sole sugar factory in Antigua as well. So you have had this monoculture over which presided these sugar barons or planters, and they control the legislature. So you had this very monolithic thing. If it were in the Soviet Union, we'd have called it by a certain name. But as it was in the British colony, we didn't use terms like totalitarian and so on. But that was very much what was there. And so now to control labor in these countries, which you are now subordinating to this new capital, you couldn't have a militant trade union. This militant trade union had been the vehicle by which V.C. Byrd had come to political power. Now he was establishing political power. He had to reduce the militants of the trade union. But there was coming this new capital, America, sometimes bringing their race prejudices, sometimes not, sometimes bringing attitudes to which people were unaccustomed, bringing styles of behavior to which people were unaccustomed. And elements within that trade union began to respond to it, contrary to what the state needed. And you had a strange thing. The moment the colonials were weakened, the trade union became a party without any distinction, so that the union was the party and the party was the union, and nobody could tell the difference. Because the president of the trade union is also the president of the party, who became head of the same government. So you wore three hats. And therefore, you had a situation where he felt he could subordinate labor. Then he had these younger trade union officers who were now challenging that. And he then fired them. The workers recognized that their welfare was now at stake. And they didn't approve of the subordination to the state and the new owners. So they challenged. And he tried to stop this new trade union which the new officers formed after they were fired. And therefore you had this confrontation which took place.
George Walter was one of the
George Walter led the Antigua Workers Union. He was the main person.
Right.
And there was Donald Halstead and Keithling Smith. And they gathered around a number of the intellectuals who had returned from UW in Canada. And so this movement started. It was progressive, as it called itself, the Progressive Labor Movement. But the closer and closer it got to power, the less progressive it became. In other words, the whole question of how you're going to manage the economy, and if you do it without British aid, and if you become too progressive, they would turn their backs on you and you would twist in the breeze, took over. And I think by the time the PLM came to power in 1971, it had already lost a lot of its cutting edge. And
so hold on, in three short years, from 1968 to 1971, the PLM was able to muster so much support in the society that it came to power in 1971 and broke that monopoly of power.
Power, yes. As a matter of fact, it could have come to power in 68. We had carried out a general strike, which brought the country to a halt in 1968. And the Prime Minister, in the discussions, decided to resign. The PLM then decided that they didn't want to take the power then. And so they waited for another period of 3 years, which was disastrous. Because what happened, the oil price hike hit in 1973, in the middle of their term, and left them totally flabbergasted. I mean, prices had tripled, it was outside of their control. I mean, they were in a disastrous.
But I notice you say them, because obviously you were involved in the movement in 1968. What happened between 1968 and 1971?
Oh,
with you and the
what had actually happened is a very interesting piece of the British representative came to Antigua and saw the leader of the Progressive Labor Movement. I was the chairman of the Progressive Labor Movement at the time, and told them, well, you know, this fellow Hector is a bit too far on the left, and you may have a problem getting British aid if he's around. At least anyway, that is how he reported it to a number of people. And he became very concerned about my presence. In the meantime, I'd also formed the Antigua-Caribbean Liberation Movement in August of 1968. And they signed that a threat coming from our new and younger generation, when we had intended at the time nothing more than education. We were now going to educate younger people as to the structure of the society, how it came about, how it functioned, what had to be done, and the general theory of socialists and otherwise that were moving people elsewhere in the world. We were bringing them closer to the African liberation movements, which were then at the height at the time, and so on. And so they became very alarmed about it. And I thought they could do better without me. But it was difficult to do because I had established quite a bit of some stature, I think, in the community, so that there was just a bit of a standoff and a hiatus. And eventually I decided that it would be better that I quit. So in 1970 I left the party before it came to power in 1971. I did not make a break with the party. I still voted for it, and I still supported it in speech because I felt it was better than the administration that was going. It had become milk and water, but at least there was some milk.
Now, the ACLM and you yourself were very much part of the Caribbean Black Power movement at that time.
Quite.
And look back at the Black Power movement and talk a little bit about some of the gains it was able to make for ordinary black African people here in the Caribbean.
I think our greatest effect has been that we were able to force them out of British examinations, for one. The GCEs were still going, and we were able to get them into a CXC mode, at least they did with a Caribbean examination. I am still quite unhappy about the content of West Indian education. I don't care which territory you go to. I don't care which territory you go to. You still find that it's the children of the middle class who are doing best in our current education system. And that says that though you have admitted the children of the working class, they are the highest level of dropouts. And you are reinforcing in people a sense of failure and a sense of a lack of self-worth, which is where you get all this other thing that has come now in the Caribbean, the drug culture, etc., etc. You have laid the foundation for that to take place. It meant obviously that you had to change your education. You had to have it more business-oriented, where people could get up and do things and have the confidence to do things. You had to have your education more project-oriented. And instead of individuals, you had to get groups of people working together in classrooms and so on, so that they develop a sense of group cohesion and so on and functioning together. Those changes were not made. I'll give you a very good story. In 1982, I was invited to Grenada after they had made the revolution and so on. And I gave a lecture on education and the revolution. And I said one of the first requirements the revolution should do is abolish homework. I said that to startle everybody, which it did. That is, that homework is the basis of inequality. Because people live in unequal homes, then it follows that inequality carries over into their performance. Right? You live in a home where you have literate parents and so on, who can encourage you. And you live in a home where you have illiterate parents who are struggling to make a living, and you as a child probably having to be involved in that process of making a living. Then you're going to get this unequal performance. Not that they're children of the poor who do not make the effort and sometimes rise heroically above, the normal. But it's a heroic effort. And a lot of them suffer from burnout after a few years. So that what we needed then was to transform the system. Revolutionary as Grenada was, they were completely affrighted by the notion. Only one or two of them took it very seriously, but Bernard Code in particular was very hostile. That the whole question of reproducing inequality in society was a fundamental problem. We were not in a position to go from private property to do private property, as some people might have thought. But we were in a position now to create a population that at least began on a level playing field. And you could begin that in terms of the revolution. Well, Morris got persuaded about it about 1983 and sent back for me. But by that time, enough
the
conflicts had gone between us and them. ACLM was excluded out of the left because they went more with the Soviet-style communists, and those who were not Soviet-style communists that isolated, which ACLM was the primary one that was isolated. And I think they paid the consequences of that. The role of the Soviet Union in the Grenada Revolution would be an interesting thing to find out.
But we're going to come back to the Grenada Revolution. Let's go back to the Black Power movement, and you lay the basis for a new kind of education. What else about the Black Power movement that impacted positively on black people?
I think it certainly change the self-perception of people. I don't think there's any black population in the world that has been more degraded than the Caribbean population. We like to think to the contrary because we have mastered a few Western arts like language and the rest of it and so on. But when they tell us that Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, we're reminded that Haiti's independence of 1802 to the present didn't produce any results, right? Didn't produce the results of transforming. We are never told, of course, that there was continuous hostility to Haiti for an intense period of time. As a matter of fact, it took the United States 60 years before it recognized Haiti as an independent nation. And it was frightened of the success of Haiti, of the effect it would have on its own slaves in the United States. So it piled enormous pressure on that society, invading it twice, taking over the government, etc., etc. And that story is, I suppose, sufficiently well known after the recent Aristide debacle. But then you had Cuba trying to make the break. And again, you had an unparalleled level of hostility. I mean, there is no embargo in the world as old as the Cuban embargo. In all of human history, they never put an embargo that long against the Soviet Union. By 1921, they were dealing with the Soviet Union in terms of trade, etc. So that it is fairly obvious, whether you look at it in terms of race or whatever, that certainly the black peoples of the Caribbean have been singled out for a particular kind of hostility. It followed too that if you were going to do anything, you had to do something to create a Caribbean movement. That there would be at least a certain level of solidarity within the Caribbean. You wouldn't find that if Grenada had made a revolution, somebody would feel compelled in Barbados to act as a Trojan horse so that you could continue to affect Grenada negatively. We tried to form that movement. At one stage, there was a link between the Caribbean, the liberation movements in Africa, and the movements in the United States, civil rights movement in the United States. It was doing tremendously well, especially organized around African Liberation Day. If you look at the American report in COINTELPRO and saw to what extent they went to destroy that unity, it is perhaps even more startling than a lot of people think. So that the Black Power movement had made itself an international force. It was not just, as some people might have felt, Stokely Carmichael making a few statements in North America and so on. In the Caribbean, it had risen to a height quite unexpected, in that it had made international linkages, Africa, tying the movements in the Caribbean, and then linked to the United States. Of course, we provoked the wrath of the United States, and they, in the Black Panther era, destroying the Black Panthers, just extended it to the rest of the Caribbean, and we went at each other's swords for reasons that nobody could understand.
You once wrote, Tim, that A.U.C. Kwan of Guyana is the father of Pan-Africanism and Black Power in the Caribbean. Talk a little bit about that, because that is not well known by a lot of people in the Caribbean.
A.U.C. since 1956, I would say. He went to Hungary, I think, in 1956, a fact that is not known. And he was in Hungary just before the revolution in Hungary. And A.U.C. had always had a notion of socialism that was fundamentally different to that of the Soviet Union. And that it had a national component recognizing national characteristics, and not a parroting of the stuff sent out from the Soviet Union, which most people did. So that A.U.C. was very different in that respect. And to do that, he recognized that African people in the Caribbean had a particular problem. They had been denied their ancestral roots, as were Indians. The Indians had a better connection in that it was closer kept, and they weren't here for 300 years. And they came at the end of in the middle of the 19th century. So that he recognized that, and recognized too, that the Africans in the Caribbean now had to re-educate themselves, had to throw off the self-contempt which they had bred about themselves by being African and feeling themselves inferior and being made to feel inferior and always occupying inferior positions in the society. So that A.U.C. began that, I would say, as early as 1956. The rest of us learned from it. We could understand why A.U.C. could eventually stand apart from Burnham, when Burnham was apparently marching under a black banner, only to be white. I mean, basically nationalizing, but without changing the structure of the management systems and so on, not bringing the people in, not educating the workers to rise to new levels, and to attempt new forms of production inside Guyana, so that UC recognized all these things. Now, when you see that, I consider him the most formidable of the intellectuals produced in the Caribbean other than C.L.R. James. I think that people will not grant him that, because you see as often being misquoted as wanting partition in Guyana and 3 different states and so forth. What UC has always advocated is something that has not come about yet. How to create a national government, a truly national government which is not based on one ethnic group or the other. We in these parts who don't have the ethnic groups like to think that we have a government. But what in fact we have are governments which are manipulated by the foreign entrepreneurs. And they are really white governments in black skin. So that I think all this is clear when you take into account AUC. I believe, if I may make a criticism of him, because when you say a person is very formidable, you can make other criticisms. I think he did not exert enough energy to lead a Caribbean movement. Maybe the problems of Guyana, the intensity of those problems, militated against that. But I thought that if UC had lent his enormous prestige too, building a nucleus of a Caribbean movement, especially after the collapse of Grenada. Two things broke up the Caribbean movement. COINTELPRO from the United States and the failure of the Grenada Revolution. After that, I think the left just retreated into a kind of repeating the neoliberal phrases with a little tinge of criticism. And that has been a monumental failure from which the region is now suffering. I don't think that you can safely say that any two parties are ideologically different from another in any single Caribbean, any or all of the Caribbean territory.
The other person you mentioned just now, C.L.R. James, certainly did not shun his responsibility in terms of trying to bring together pan-Caribbean movement. Talk about C.L.R. James, because I know he has tremendous influence on you as a person, as an intellectual, as a political activist. When did you first come into contact with C.L.R. James?
That's a strange story. C.L.R. James was banned from the United States in '53. And we decided to bring him to Canada in 1968. We brought him to Canada with no problems. We didn't have a lot of money, but people were extremely generous in Canada, and so putting up C.L.R. James and keeping him moving around Canada didn't prove a problem. He had just contested an election in Trinidad, which the party, Workers and Farmers Party, which is the first of the modern left parties, had lost terribly. And he had come to Canada, and we were just talking one day, and he said a number of people have been writing him, and he showed me the letters about getting him back in the United States. And I said to him, why don't we go down the road and apply for a visa? He said, are you crazy? These people put me on Ellis Island, incarcerated me, and treated me very badly and so on. They were terrified of me during the period. I said, that's that period. They are terrified of some people who have no theory of society and who may destroy it in Watts and Detroit and other parts of the country, and they're absolutely terrified. They'd probably like to have you there at least to put perhaps a more constructive view on things, and to get people not as Luddites, but at least as some kind of revolution. We went down to the U.S. Embassy after a little persuasion, and we met the man, and he says, yes, C.L.R. James. He looked in his files. They didn't have computers then. He looked in his files. He came back out. He said, well, you were banned from the United States. What do you want to go and do in the United States? Lecture. University has offered a position. He said, all right. And without much fuss, he stamped the passport with a U.S. visa. And James was on his way in a couple of weeks. But we had, during the period in Canada, developed a study circle around James, which I believe is one of the decisive moments in my personal life. The opportunity to study with C.L.R. James over a 6-month period, of intense work, which diverted me away from doing a doctorate, thank heaven. And that period was intensely important. We had started the Caribbean Service Bureau, in which we had contacted people like Walter Rodney and everybody else who was anywhere in the world related to the Caribbean. And that had begun developing there. Now I think James was a tremendous influence, because James got us out of that framework where the Soviet Union looked like an alternative to American imperialism, and showed that there was no difference in many respects. One was one party and therefore perhaps more totalitarian. And the other one had to keep forms of democracy. But underneath those forms, it was no less, autocratic. The forms are purely there to give people, which people are now finding out that Republicans and Democrats, Dole or Clinton, you may have less sex scandals with one and more with the other, and so on. But, you may have one or two more gestures made by the younger man and so on, but more or less the same. The bananas would have still gone down on the Dole, most certainly, and they went down on the Clinton just as well, but with a little more unease on the part of Clinton, we may say, but the end result is the same. Now, we came to understand those things. We did a tremendous study of American society, not to be anti-American, but to understand the society. What made it, what is the historical movement, what made it tick, what made it function. And we are very grateful for James for that. I don't think that anything I have done in my life has been more important.
Tim, let's fast forward to 1983. You mentioned the Grenadian Revolution, and you played some role in that revolution. You were one of the influential figures. And it certainly was one of the most agonizing periods in modern Caribbean history. What happened in Grenada?
Well, I think two things happened of note. One was the departure of the Grenada Revolution from its original conception. That is, how to organize people on the ground to be a part of the process. That is, to reconstruct the state. We didn't comprise just of a cabinet and ministers and a mass of people outside, but how to bring banana growers and so on into the discussion of what we need to do, how we need to do it, why we need to raise the quota, why we need to improve production, and for them to make decisions. It failed to do that. It failed to develop the community councils it promised, to bring an alienated people. Remember, the Caribbean people are essentially alienated people. We have never owned and controlled our societies. It's not that we are conquered people who used to once own and control our societies and somebody came in and conquered us and subordinated us. We were never that. We were transplanted here. And in that transplant, we were never in control. We were at the lowest level of subordination, slavery. So that it follows now that you have to give people a sense of connection. It's not enough to say I'm a Grenadian because I come from there. It's that I'm a Grenadian in that I participate in the making of that society, not just as a worker. People like to say they contribute, especially intellectuals. Return home and say, you should make my contribution. Sounds wonderfully idealistic and quite impressive. But what are you contributing to? Towards strengthening neocolonialism, etc., etc. That's the end result of what you're doing. And it seems to me that Morris and them failed, and I say that, I said it then, I'm saying it now. These are not criticisms that I'm making after. They had a tremendous mass movement. I do not believe that I've seen anywhere, anytime, any place, a more enthusiastic population than I saw in my first visit to Grenada. I'm going to say something which may sound strange to you. Not even Carnival equaled the enthusiasm of the Grenada people I saw in normal periods of existence, just after the revolution. I thought they wasted that tremendous enthusiasm of the people by trying to organize a Soviet-style vanguard party, which is a total and complete absurdity. It eventually ended up as joint leadership and disputes about all sorts of things that had nothing to do with the mass of people's lives. But they had not brought the people in. Now, for instance, this is the first time I'm going to say this in public. I was invited to a cabinet meeting when they were doing the airport. And I did not agree with the idea of the airport. I felt that I understood very clearly that the people of Grenada had a sense of connection with an international airport. But I recognized that an international airport did not depend on the people of Grenada, depended on international airlines. Whether they would want to use it, whether they would reconstruct their routes to include Grenada, whatever the level of travel to or from Grenada was going to be significant enough for them to want to get in on it. I felt that it could become a white elephant. I said that in the cabinet meeting and said I would prefer to see them concentrate that kind of capital into housing and small enterprise. It didn't sound very fashionable, I must confess. airport leveling hills and mountains and big engineering things and so on, you know. I mean, well outside the reach of the ordinary person, but likely to impress him. As a prestige project, it was wonderful. As an economic project, it was, in my view, disastrous. But I remain, the person is now dead, Eunice Whiteman, went along with me, but eventually we two sort of conceded. We didn't bring it down to a clash of opinions. I was not from Grenada anyway.
Right.
And we didn't bring it down to a clash. But the Cubans were quite intrigued by what we were saying. But they took it's up to the people of Grenada and up to the people who have to make that decision. I would have liked to have seen that debate go on in public and not between some people in a room. In other words, if that had become a public debate, if even the airport thing would have won, look at the tremendous advantage that the population would have had in debating things of that nature. I think the revolution began to go downwards after the revolutionary leaders only spoke to the people and didn't attempt to develop them and develop political institutions in which they participated. I thought that was the greatest failure of Maurice Bishop. He went along until 1982 with the Soviet-leaning thing. He tried to posture like Fidel Castro in his positions against the United States, which I thought were unnecessary.
Did you say this personally to Maurice?
I said that to him many times.
What was his response?
Hostile. We were two of the closest friends in the Caribbean movement because of, among other things, we were the two who smoked, right? So we always huddling together and smoking and so on, you know, so that we were always staying out late at night, both engaged in various enterprises. And so we were very, very close, and it was understood that there was a link. Strange enough, there was a link between AUC, the Saints, and these two bad boys.
Yes.
But we always carried a line which is different from the others, in that we believed that the question the Caribbean needed to do was to break from the old parliamentary democracy and develop a popular democracy. And that we could demonstrate that through that popular democracy, the division of the workers and intellectuals which took place in the other things would be mended. We had hoped that Maurice, who I think was perhaps our biggest convert, I think between you and I made him a convert to that, and we were very happy, would really be in a position to institute that. But then there came this oral tendency, led by Code, which began instructing people in the fundamentals of Marxism by Stalin.
Stalin, of all people.
I mean, a book that wasn't read in the Soviet Union any longer.
Yes.
And there was this nonsense, this, complete, prostitution of Marxism and socialism being put there, and people were chatting nonsense about you have the science and so on. And people began to develop all sorts of abstract concepts, totally unrelated to anything concretely in the ground. Eventually it ended up with that stupid argument in the Central Committee and so on, as people became more and more abstract. And eventually ended up like how all Stalinist arguments end, in murder. Right? The complete elimination of one side by the other, and the manipulation to get a majority in the rest of it, which is a very, very painful period in Caribbean history, but a very useful one. You cannot take over an ideology from Europe, America, anyway, I don't care where it comes from, without indigenizing it. That is, how does it apply here? Is it valid here? Does it produce a valid analysis of the society? And if so, to what extent? And where does it fall short? And what do we have to add? That kind of creative thinking, I think, went out of Grenada. It ended up in that sterile mess, which became the NJM. And it ended up in murder and mayhem.
Let's move from Grenada for a moment and go to something that you have written extensively and talked extensively about, cricket.
Yeah.
The life wire of Caribbean society, as you have said on more than one occasion. And I want to come all the way forward to the present. You have differed from a number of other analysts in the Caribbean in that you don't seem to think that there is a big crisis in our cricket.
There's absolutely no crisis.
All right, elaborate on that.
Intellectuals are always creating a crisis within us. Always. The famous word is a crisis. 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 Everything you read, Clinton is now in crisis. Not in crisis, Zip may be in crisis, but not anything else. But there's always this thing about crisis. Now let us look at something. The most astonishing leaders that the Caribbean have produced. I'm going to name them, I think. Norman Mandela of Jamaica, Grantley Adams of Barbados, Cheddi Jagan of Guyana. I will state those three. They all started operating on the scene before in the 1950s. The most astonishing leaders we have produced after the 1960s are Worrell, Sobers, Lloyd, Vivian Richards, and though some people don't think so, Mr. Walsh, one of the most phenomenal persons ever to grace anything named sport. Ever. I mean, as a matter of fact, I have James saying that anytime you have two fast bowlers over 30, you're in trouble. And I believe Walsh and Ambrose have disproved even James on that point. Because he is this phenomenal human being who has kept going and got better over time. Remember the West Indies were dropping him in 91?
Right.
And 7 years later, he's the linchpin of the attack. He and Ambrose are still the linchpin of the attack. What am I demonstrating here? Here you have a mastery of a craft. The skills involved in cricket, whether it's bowling or whatever it is, batting, and Vivian Richards, Lloyd, etc. Mastery of strategy. And what did that cricket team do? When the rest of the world was going around trumpeting how great its management systems were, and how important they were in England and Australia, and so forth and so on, and the Alan Borders and the Chappells arrived at the scene, and the Lillys and the Thompsons and so on, projecting that they were the best of Western civilization. Lloyd and Richards humbled those posturing, humbled them completely at the cricket field. They said, wherever we come from the smallest cricketing country in the world, with the least amount of capital. We have no big business sponsoring us to do anything. But when it comes out here on the cricket field in skills of human skills, let's see who is boss. And you do that for 15 years? No club in the United States, no baseball group has dominated baseball, whether they had Babe Ruth or whoever it is they may have had functioning. They don't do that. We did it in an unprecedented thing in world history. Unprecedented. And we did it as the West Indies. We didn't do it as Jamaica or Trinidad or whatever. It seems to me that we have failed to recognize that in that fundamental activity, in which the only thing in which West Indians see themselves as West Indians, that there was this dramatic development. We had been able to prove that we could overcome shortage of capital and compete with other countries, even with that uneven playing field, and come out victors. Now we pass through a period where we begin to lose 2 or 3 years, and people believe that we should keep on winning forever. But what is astonishing is it? Worrell led it because Worrell was the best batsman at one stage and became a remarkable leader. Lloyd led it, good batsman, fielder. Richard led it. All of these were exceptional people, but working in a unity, which we have never been able to do in our economics and politics. And so you have that profound example being set. Now, cricket in England had its significance. It disciplined a class out of the public schools, gave them a sense of values. The aristocracy was declining, and the new industrial class was emerging, and the public school discipline from Rugby, Eton, Harrow, etc. came in. It eventually went into the universities and so on. They produced their cricketers from there. Here and there, a miner's son, like Truman, would make the side, and Boycott and so on would make the side. But in the Caribbean, there's a different thing. It is the mass of the population who are involved in cricket, who have been disciplined by cricket. Let me give you a very stirring example. In the first test match in Trinidad recently against England, the match ended, and both captains are making their statements. Atherton says, we lost because of the pitch. And the crowd promptly booed him. Not because they thought the pitch was good, but because he had broken the cricket code. You don't have recriminations and so on when you lose. You take your loss, as they say in England, with a stiff upper lip. And the crowd was quite disturbed that here the English captain, who is supposed to be the representative of these values, comes and squeals and squawks at the end of the game. Naturally, they didn't thought the wicket was perfect or good enough perhaps for the better test matches, but they were satisfied that both teams played in it. And it gave no advantage to one or the other side. When Arsenal did that, there's another one. A lot of people dislike Mr. Lara. I do not. I like the fellow who stands up and says, I want to lead. I'm sorry, he doesn't have to behave like, if you give me, I'll take it. With a coy modesty, which West Indian politicians often do. They set up their schemes to lead love, and then coyly, if I'm drafted, I will accept. I think, Lara, when you find a young man today in the Caribbean wanting to lead anything, in an age of dropoutism, where everybody is abandoning responsibility, I think that's a significant thing. I don't say that he behaved well about it, but I think you should look at the broader picture. But watch him in the test matches. Williams takes a catch, and he turns to Williams immediately. Did you catch it cleanly? No. Immediately signals the umpire. Not a clean catch. Stuart Williams, feeling now that is the keeper Williams. Stuart Williams, at a tense moment in the second test match, takes a catch at second slip. Lara looks over and looks at him. He was about to claim the catch, and Lara looks over and looks at him, and he signals immediately. Now this would have been our 8th wicket. We would have been more or less poised perhaps to win the game. But Lara refuses to win by playing foul.
Do you think he has the capability of becoming a great leader?
I don't only think so, I'm certain that he will. I'm going to tell you that it is my opinion that he's going to dominate batting like nobody else has.
What is the basis for that?
All right. He came into cricket as a great offside stroke maker. McGrath worked him out, right? And kept pitching the ball close to him, and he could no longer play the shots with the room that he had. So everybody pitched at him wicket to wicket. If you watch Lara now, he takes all those balls from outside the off stump and puts them through the onside. In other words, like Headley, he has readjusted his game, right? Like Vivian Richards, he has readjusted his game. Like Jack Hobbs, before that, he has readjusted his game without any. At the moment, there is a decline in productivity because he hasn't mastered it as yet. But I know that he will master it. And you will find a very different stroke maker. He is even venturesome now. I saw him get out in the second innings of this. So ball he shouldn't have got out of. He could have easily played it forward, but he was pinned down for a moment and decided to risk the shot. Too close to him, took the bottom edge. But he's going to become a tremendous onside player. And they're going to pack the onside, and he'll return to be an offside player as well. And he plays both off the front and the back foot. And I think you're going to have a startling little batsman.
Let's talk about somebody that you and I share a passion for in the West Indies cricket team, Carl Hooper. What are your thoughts on Hooper?
Now, people have been very unkind to Carl Hooper. Carl Hooper goes to Pakistan, heads the batting average. He goes to Sharjah immediately after that. And he's named man of the series in spite of the fact that the West Indies lose. England wins, Pakistan does just beat us. Hooper is named man of the series. He comes to the West Indies, plays in his first test match against England, and he is man of the match. And everybody says this inconsistent, enigmatic Hooper. Hooper is no longer inconsistent. That he didn't do well in the second test is to be expected. I mean, he's not going to do very well, but I predict that at the end of this series, he'll hit the batting average. Because he too has remodeled his game. He has reduced his margin of error considerably. And people say he was weak in temperament. I don't believe it. I don't buy psychological explanations very easily, right? America has developed this pseudo-psychology to the point of an ideology, right? I mean, they explain everything by this. I mean, Clinton is doing what he's doing because his mother wasn't whatever, the other, and so on and so on. I mean, I don't buy those explanations, right? I mean, I know a lot of people who have good mothers who do the same things that Clinton does. I mean, I have no problem with that, or good fathers, as the case may be. But I am quite convinced that Hooper is going to end his career as a towering little batsman. And between Lara, Shandapal, and Hooper, we're going to see a style of batting equal to and perhaps better than the 3W.
And we're going to see a resurgence of West Indies cricket along with that.
There is no, I don't think we have fallen unusually. Let me explain something and why I say that. Nobody remembers Pakistan whitewashing or brownwashing Australia. But Kim Hughes took an Australian team out to Pakistan and lost 3-0. Nobody remembers. It is a forgotten thing. It's just like it only happened to the West Indies. That's quite easy to happen. You fall into a state, you have lost one or two key players, and at that moment, things haven't settled. But the potential is still there. Who would like to convince me? I don't care who it is. I am quite convinced that Dillon, Rolls, Colin Stewart, Ren King are going to be people who will replace these bowlers and probably do something quite devastating.
Tim, time is running out on us. Let me throw some words and terms at you and give me some quick answers.
Yes, I do that.
Structural adjustment.
Structural adjustment. As long as we continue to be little island states, we're going to be structurally adjusted downward year in, year out. Every decade we will have one.
Shipwriters agreement.
It should be abolished.
Why?
Why do we need the United States coming into our territory and having extra territorial powers in our country? We just must resist it, period. And we must say to ourselves that we can socially organize our country to eliminate cocaine. I want to be very specific. Not marijuana, but cocaine. I want to be absolutely specific. As far as I'm concerned, nobody has convinced me that marijuana does anybody any significant harm. And if somebody wants to smoke it, go right ahead.
Martin Carter, the poet.
Easily the most significant poet produced in the Caribbean, Derek Walcott notwithstanding. Martin Carter spoke to the people of the Caribbean from Guyana, and nobody else has done it better. Nobody. He spoke to the Caribbean, and he not only spoke to the Caribbean people, in speaking to the oppressed people of the Caribbean, he has become a voice anywhere where people are oppressed.
The legacy of Walter Rodney.
I would say that Walter Rodney is perhaps the political result of Martin Carter. I think I am one of the few people who would say that. The universality which Martin Carter established by being particular, that is, to the Caribbean and to the strugglers of the Caribbean. Whereas Derek Walcott went universal without being too particular. Right? I think Walter represents that. He achieved a certain level of universality out of the Guyana experience. Out of going to Tanzania, he broadened that perspective. It is one of the tragedies of the Caribbean that his life was taken by way of assassination. It is an equally more terrible tragedy that even after this long period, we are capable of investigating what happened and satisfying ourselves as to what happened, in spite of a change of government. I think it is a minor disaster. But I would want to say that had Walter Rodney lived, I don't like to deal in the might-have-beens of history, the Caribbean would have been still very different.
Will there ever be Caribbean unity in your lifetime?
I would think that it is becoming inevitable. These fellows who are holding on to power now, except with their stealing hand over fist, are not enjoying it. It's becoming a terrible headache to govern these countries, and they age, they get old, they get all kinds of problems coming at them, where they make an effort. And if you look at the most significant of them at the moment, or in Arthur, the most significant of the present crop of Caribbean leaders, he has recognized that in Barbados, which is structurally adjusted, that there's no way they're going to come out of it, except they come out with some kind of Caribbean unity. And so he's moving towards unity with the OACS. And I believe that that is a significant development. And in fact, at the current moment, is the most significant thing taking place in the Caribbean.
Tim, we started in Antigua and we started with you. Let's come back to Antigua. You took a bold step in merging your ACLM with another opposition group and forming the United People's Movement. You contested the last elections, didn't win, but came out quite strong. You played a very important role in that. Elections are due in another year's time. Talk about your chances.
I think the UPP, the party to which I belong, will win the election. Now, it is very difficult for people outside of Antigua to understand the kind of corruption that has gone on in Antigua. When you talk of Antigua having a $1 billion debt, national debt, and no projects to show for it, and not a single project that is paying back any part or portion of that debt. Let me repeat myself. Not a single project that is paying back any part or portion of that debt. That debt has to be paid not by the enterprises it is spent on, but by taxpayers' money. So that we have reached a stage now where revenues can't meet that commitment. What do we think about these invasions of capital, which do not do anything other than provide a few jobs?
And on that note, Tim Hector, Pan-Africanist, Caribbean patriot, historian, political activist, and cricket writer, and a man of vision. Thank you very, 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 very much for this interview.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Air transportation to Antigua was provided by Air Jamaica. Air Jamaica is the official carrier of the Caribbean nation. And a teleaccommodation for our crew was provided by the beautiful Rexhaltian Cove Resort. The Rexhaltian Cove Resort is quite possibly Antigua's finest resort. And by the Antigua and Barbuda Office of Tourism, who invites you to come and experience paradise.
Well, I'm sure you will agree with me that it has been a most stimulating and informative interview with Tim Hector. We hope that we have been able to bring to you some valuable information on Caribbean and Antiguan politics. Until the next time, this is David Hines thanking you for tuning in to yet another edition of CaribNation. And remember, as always, our motto here is one people, one culture, one Caribbean, one nation. Welcome to CaribNation. I'm David Hines, coming to you once again from Barbados here at the University of the West Indies. We're going to talk cricket in this next half an hour, and we're going to talk with Sir Conrad Hunte, former opening batsman and vice captain of the West Indies cricket team. Sir Conrad Hunte, welcome to CaribNation. You've just finished a stirring address on cricket and apartheid. Talk for a little bit about Sir Frank Worrell, the person whose tonight's lecture was dedicated to. Talk about what Sir Frank Worrell means for Caribbean cricket today, but more importantly for the Caribbean nation.
That's right. Without doubt, Sir Frank was a real visionary. He had a remarkable concept of what we as a people, not just as a cricket team, could do. His legacy now is needed more now than ever before because there's noticeable fragmentation in our island states. They're not working together as well as they should do. But I have hope, and I think Frank Worrell will be encouraged by this. A number of our leaders are now friends and visionaries like himself. And I expect that these leaders may have to give a new direction to the team. Whereas before the West Indies cricket team was the image of what the West Indies people were like as a nation, now because we've gone so far down, as a people, as a team, the inspired political leaders and thinkers like Hilary Beckers and those at the university may now have to describe for us a vision of what we could be like. And out of that will come a new West Indies team again.
You're making the link between cricket and the wider society. You said in your lecture earlier that until the Caribbean can realize that unity, that regional spirit, that only then our cricket will rise again. Let's get back to Sir Frank Worrell. You were vice captain to him. Tell me about probably one or two things that you learned under Sir Frank Worrell.
Well, without doubt, the thing I learned most was his grasp of the West Indies team as a remarkable force for good. He used to say to us, gentlemen, we've come here to win the series, no doubt. But beyond that, we've come here to win the respect and the admiration of the Australian people. That was during the tour of 1960-61 in Australia and Tasmania. So he always saw beyond the boundary to what we as a people could be and do, always. And he used to say to us, we're not just cricketers, we're statesmen, we're ambassadors. So we must live like that, and we must perform like that, no matter where we are and how we are. And I think that was the greatest legacy he gave to me. And that's what I've tried in my own life and in my own sphere to uphold ever since.
You played under Sir Frank Worrell, you played under Garfield Sobers, two of the eminent captains in our time. Talk about our present captain, Brian Lara, and talk about how he fits into that long line of distinguished leadership.
Well, one of the important challenges for any captain of West Indies is that he in fact occupies a position, in some sense, in quotes, greater than a prime minister or president. Only in the sense that 5 million people in the Caribbean are looking to him for some direction and some leadership. That is a terrible responsibility. Brian is what I call one of the new generation of people who've grown up since independence. They're 2 generations after post-independence, and they're 3 decades away from the thing that stirred us and make us great. Consequently, I think at the beginning, Brian did not understand this very well, and it affected him. But since the loss to South Africa, and since our victory in Sabina Park in the second test match against Australia, I have noticed a change in Brian Lara. I noticed a more humble person, a more realistic person. He's a terrific batter. I mean, without doubt, he's a genius as a batsman. And whatever happens, he needs to bat, make runs for West Indies all the time. And I'm glad to see that he's not only now making runs, but he's beginning to captain the side in a way how I would like to see him captain the side.
You spoke movingly tonight about the fact that you were born black and you were born poor, you were born disenfranchised, and you trace the path from then to now. Link all of this up for our viewers.
Yes, indeed. I have got this inner understanding of life that doesn't matter where you were born or how you were born. What matters is how you achieve, what you achieve in life, and how far you reach. So from quite early in life, at age 11, I got a vision that I was meant to be one of the outstanding people in the world. I was meant to be somebody. It so happened that I had this gift for cricket, so cricket was my vehicle for upward mobility, both socially and economically. So that is why I say I rose from poverty to plenty, from being discriminated against because I was black to being acclaimed because I was bright at cricket. And I exchanged my colonial past for an independent present. That did not give me the right just to look after myself and feel proud or puffed up. I believe my name and fame was given to me so that I might use it to help lift fallen humanity and to encourage other people also to rise from where they are, no matter how they were born or where they were born. They have within them what I call acres of diamonds. And life is about discovering what their acres of diamonds are, trying to learn how to discover them, develop them, and display them for their own benefit and for the benefit of others. And I think that's a very important lesson I can pass on to the youth.
And many people do not know that when you left the cricket field, that you went on to a bigger field, that you used the fame that you got from cricket to help humanity, especially fight against racism. Right. Your experiences in England and later on in South Africa. Talk a little bit about your experiences in England.
That's right. In 1967, I retired from cricket earlier than I needed to, at 35 years of age, because I had a little bit of a bad knee, but also I saw there was a growing conflict in Britain at that time. The West Indies team in 1963 were hailed as heroes. The West Indies team in 66 got poison letters in the post saying, "What are you doing here? This is not your country, go home." Because there was a fear in England that the many people coming in from the former Commonwealth into England would somehow lower the standard of life there and cause conflict. The opposite would be true, in fact, if they had opened the doors and their hearts well. So I saw that as someone who was respected by the white and who also had a touch with the black, I had a part to play to build bridges between the two countries. So when I retired in 1967 from cricket, I then used my contacts to work up and down 33 different communities in England, trying to talk to the police, the trade union movement, the employees and things like that, as well as to the immigrants, and so that we could build a multiracial society in Britain for all to share. And it is no secret that when Martin Luther King was assassinated on the 4th of April 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, there would have been racial violence in Notting Hill in England. But because of the 6 months I had to work in England, rather than being with the West Indies team in Jamaica, I was able to meet some of the top leaders in the Black Power movement and persuade them that violence was not the only way to bring justice, that we had to find, like Martin Luther King, a non-violent way to bring justice. And because I had worked with them before King was assassinated, they called the demonstration off in Notting Hill that they were planning. And that saved Britain, I think, a lot of maybe lives and hardship. And I'm very grateful for that. And from then onwards, the police asked me to train them in multicultural strategies and tactics to deal with a new situation in Britain, which was very new to the country.
And then you ventured into South Africa, at that time most notorious for its apartheid system. Tell us a little bit about your experiences in South Africa.
Well, because of my experience in England, I worked there from 67 to 80 with visits to other parts of the world. I went to Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea. But with that experience, my friends in South Africa felt that I could play a part in meeting people privately, individually, and helping to bring understanding in the white community and bring hope and healing to the black community. So I went there on 6 visits from 1976 to 1989, meeting people in all different walks of life at all different levels. And I was always able to use my own experiences, my own background, to give them hope that maybe someday, I don't know when, I don't know how, a solution can come to them. But meanwhile, they had to prepare themselves, because bitterness destroys the one who is bitter and does nothing for the justice of his cause. So I tried to get the black people to shed their bitterness, but not the justice of their cause, in order to build for the future a South Africa for all black and white that they all could be proud of. And so as a result of that, I then went back in 1991 as a cricket coach. So all that previously, my work from 76 to 89, helped me in my work from 1992 to 1999, when I came back to Barbados.
You talked about when you first went to South Africa and went to Soweto, and you look at that vast expand of land. Talk a little bit about what you felt when you looked over that township, as they called it.
Well, I arrived in Soweto just 5 months after the June 16 riots of 1976. And some of the comrades who had taken part in those riots took me on a sightseeing tour of Soweto. And they took me to a park called the Sir Ernest Oppenheimer's Tower. And from that position, I could see a panoramic view of Soweto stretching out beneath me as far as the eyes could see. At that time, conservative estimates said 3.5 million people lived there. Today is more like 5.3 million. It's the 5th largest city in the Southern Hemisphere. From that position, they showed me how that the police, with their brutal tactics, had caused them to react, and they burnt the bottle shops, the post offices, the libraries, and the schools in reaction to what the police were doing. And after only 3 days there, having seen some of that, and also experiencing that the people in Soweto didn't own their homes. They had no inside running water, no inside toilets, no tarred roads, no electricity. After 3 days there, I felt a deep trauma in my spirit. It so happened I went straight from Soweto to Stellenbosch, complete opposite. Stellenbosch was a beautiful university town with lovely buildings, lovely tree-lined avenues, lovely tar roads, everything. I love beauty as well. But I could not forget the agony of Soweto. And then on my third visit to Stellenbosch, a thought surfaced in my mind, and that helped me to resolve the conflicts I was feeling. The thought said, Soweto and Stellenbosch are two extremities of the same human reality. The white man needs the black man needs the white man. And by the most drastic change in the black man and the white man, South Africa will be a pattern of unity for the world. Now, I carried that hope of an answer with me in my 6 visits to South Africa, as I said, between 76 and 89. I didn't know how it would come, and I didn't know who would bring it. But then Nelson Mandela was released from Robben Island after 27 years. He was the hope, and he brought the answer.
Let us get back to some purely cricketing matters. You were probably the greatest opening batsman that the West Indies has produced. And obviously we have a crisis these days with our batting in general, but our opening batting in particular. Talk a little bit about what you see as some of the deficiencies of our batsmen these days.
Our present batsmen, especially openers, do not move their feet enough. When you open an innings and the ball is moving around and is new, you must be like a ballet dancer. You must be light on your feet. You must be able to move forward and backwards, sideways and otherwise very quickly at a drop of a hat, because that ball is coming at you almost like 90 miles an hour. A number of our cricketers need to learn to skip. Like any boxer, Muhammad Ali, when they prepare for boxing, that's what they do, they skip. They must be light on their feet. Secondly, some of them show some very glaring technical errors. They play across the line rather than straight. And I think that comes out of a lack of proper coaching in the last 10, 15 years. Not so much the technical stuff, but the mental and psychological stuff. Chaps were not, I don't think, enough sharpened in their mental acumen. They were not taught how to think, how to visualize, how to set goals, and how to overcome negative influences. We're going to have to instill that now in the present team, because I think it's not too late. It is late, but not too late. We can still do that. But even beyond that, we're going to have to go back now out in our villages and our districts, where a lot of us came from as raw youngsters with raw talent. We're going to have to find the new talent, inculcate in them these qualities, bring them on, and West Indies will one day be great again.
Do you think that one-day cricket has had a negative influence on our batsmen?
I think so. I used to think that even the mature players, because they were mature and set in their technique, might not be affected. I'm beginning to change my mind. I think the one-day approach has affected our ability to concentrate over long periods for the 5-day test match series, even for the mature players, and especially for the youngsters whose technique is not being formed. I think that the one-day cricket has negatively affected their technique, and that's why you see a lot of them playing across, hitting balls through the air. I'm inspired and encouraged by my friend Evan Weeks. He said that in a whole career spanning 15 years, he only hit 1 6 in his life, and that was off no ball. His idea was, when you hit the ball in the air, you stand a chance of being out, so hit it on the ground.
You played with some of the best spinners the world has produced. Sonny Ramadhin, Alfred Valentine, Lance Gibbs. Today, spin is not something that is featuring very much in West Indies cricket. Talk about the decline of spin bowling, and talk about how we can get spin bowling to feature once again in our cricket.
Yeah, things have a way of working in cycles, and of course, I think it was Clive Lloyd who went after the 75 defeat in Australia. He saw the effectiveness of the fast bowlers, and because we had a proliferation of fast bowling, he said, well, let us use what we have, let's have an attack, a 4-pound attack of fast bowlers. And so the spinner was not encouraged for 20 years. And of course, if the spinner is not encouraged, because he takes a long time to learn his craft and his art, they have died out. You know, there have been few who surfaced but didn't have a chance, so they went by the wayside. But I noticed it's beginning to come back again. Young Nehemiah Perry bowled very well against Australia in the second test match at Savannah Park. I'm sorry that this fella, Ram Nawain, got a shoulder injury. I liked him as a left-hand leg spin googly bowler. I think we're going to have to, in our next, what Professor Lubethel calls the next rise of West Indies cricket, we're going to have to look again out in our villages and our districts for the youngster who has a fascination with spin the ball and encourage them, because I think the best attack is a balanced attack. You need your fast bowlers, but you also need your spinners, because on the day in which the batsmen get on top, you're going to need somebody who's going to come in and bowl long overs, but good overs, like Shane Warne or McGill, and give you a chance of getting wickets.
So Conrad, You played some brilliant innings in your time. Probably the most memorable was your 260 in association with Sir Garfield Sobers during his record-breaking 365 in 1957 against Pakistan. Relive that innings for us.
Well, that was a remarkable time because Pakistan battled first and got only 108. And so I went up with Rohan Kanai and opened the innings. And I had a feeling something remarkable was going to happen because the very first ball from a fellow called Khan Mohammed, he seemed to be trying to bowl a bumper to me. And so I was already in position to try to hook, but the ball didn't get up. It kept straight down. But luckily I had kept my eyes on the ball. And as a result, I hit that ball off middle stump with a cross bat, which I don't encourage people to do. It went for 4 runs, and I thought my day is in. And it so happened that I got going, and Kanai and I put on 100 runs for the first wicket. And then walked Gary Sobers. And somebody had said, you know, when this young man gets 100, he's going to get 3. And sure enough, Gary and I got together for the next 2 days, and the Pakistanis could not penetrate our defense nor stop our attacking shots. And I was ahead of him by 100 runs. I was going for the partnership record, which was 451, set in 1934 by Don Bradman and Ponsford. I was aware of the record. I made a fatal flaw. I did not register that Ijaz Butt was a substitute fielder at mid-wicket. I assumed that he was like the rest, leaden-footed now after 2 days in the field. But because he was fresh, I got in line and pushed the ball to his left. Certain single, because we've been running so well between the wickets. But he scooped in on the ball quicker than I anticipated. He collected the ball with one hand, direct hit on the sticks on the other end, and I was just an inch out. I was absolutely poleaxed. Not so much for the individual record, but for the world record. I felt I had let Gary down. I had made a calculated error in my judgment, and as a result was 5 runs short of that wonderful record. But all things being well, I think the right man went on to score that record because Gary is the best ever cricketer who have ever lived.
Talk a little bit about Rohan Kanai. You're one of your partners in that innings.
Yes, indeed. Rohan, in the 1957-58 series against Pakistan, was asked to open with me. But he's not really an opening batsman, he's really number 3. But he and I put on more 100-wicket opening partnership than any other body. In my whole long career, I had some 13 or 14 extra partners. But Rohan and I played best together as openers and also at 1 and 3, because often we got a wicket, lost a wicket early. Ron came in, he played so well the new ball. He and I were always able to redress the situation. And I admire and respect my friend Rohan Bubalai Kanhai for his remarkable gift. Also, he's another genius of cricket.
So Conrad Hunte, finally, parting words for Caribbean people as we move into the new millennium.
All my Caribbean friends out there, as we move into the new millennium, in a global village, we as a Caribbean people need to accept our calling to be one. I believe we are knitted together by a common heritage and a common history. And we must form some kind of a political union, a confederation, if you like, of West Indies states, where our unity out of diversity will be our strength and our glory. And as with the West Indies team, we grew to be the best in the world and eventually brought a new dynamic to the world of cricket. We as a West Indian people, united as one, will bring a new dynamic into the world of the economy and the politics of humanity.
Words of inspiration from Sir Conrad Hunte, former opening batsman and vice captain of the West Indies cricket team. Thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wendy Fitzwilliam, Miss Universe 1998, and I'm watching you, CaribNation.
Reverend Wesley Hall, former West Indies fast bowler, cricket administrator, welcome to CaribNation.
Thank you very much indeed.
Wes, first of all, let me congratulate you on your recent ordination as Minister of Religion.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's talk about cricket. You have been an administrator, manager of various West Indies cricket team over the last 10 years or so. And obviously, it is well known that it's been over the last 10 years that we've begun our, if you will, fall from grace as a leading cricketing nation. Talk a little bit to us about how that all started.
Well, I think that you have to remember that teams, you know, you will get great teams, and as soon as the very great players all retire at one time, you'll get going to a transition period. And I think that we have been very lucky from the days of Bradman through, from the days of the Black Bradman, George Headley, through to Sober, World Weeks, Walcott, Sobers, Hunt, Viv Richards, Greenidge, Haynes, all the great players, Clive Lloyd. We have been able to produce them in successive years, but and down to Lara and Hooper, these guys. But what happens when you get a situation like in 1995, when so many of them left the scene at the same time, and you go into this transition period, it is rather difficult to sort of, you know, get the team to click. And after we lost, there was so much postulation in the press about us having fallen from grace and things like that in 1995-96 against England. But I would say that we are on the way back, and it has happened even to the great Australian sides. You remember that invincible Warwick Armstrong side? You also remember the Don Bradman 1948 side? And, you know, this has happened to the great English sides. Now, the English sides of 1960s were a very good size. And I think that you just go in cycles.
One observation made about the West Indies team is the lack of that mental toughness that was reminiscent of former teams. Do you agree with that?
Well, in a way, yes. And how do you get mental toughness? In playing cricket, you get physical fitness and mental fitness. Now, physical fitness is rather easy to get. Anybody can run, you know, you could start walking for 40 minutes a day, increase it to an hour, and then you can start trotting, you can start doing sprinting bursts, and your body responds marvelously to that type of rigorous, in the end, preparation. So you become very fit. But how do you prepare your mind? It's a harder thing. It is not really only you alone. When you talk about mental fitness, that is a team approach. The team, I must be your keeper, and you must be mine. In other words, let me explain it to you. The opening batsmen must do their job. They are there to open and give us a good start. The number 3 batsman must never be an opening batsman. He must come in. He's obviously your best player. He must come in when the ball has had at least 20 overs, where the wicket no longer has that height that the bowlers are getting out of it and bounce. You know, the wicket is now innocuous 2 hours after it has started, and the 4, 5, and 6 are getting better and better. But if the number 3 man leaves it for the number 5, he obviously is going to leave it to the number 7. It's a domino effect. So
you served several stints as a selector, as chairman of the selectors, and obviously this whole issue of insularity has crept into our cricket time and time again. Talk a little bit about your experience as a selector trying to pick a cricket team, a West Indian cricket team, and coming up against criticisms from the various territories.
Well, yeah, well, I've had a lot of experience managing the side when it was a world rating side. And one thing I'd say to you is that we played once in Australia with a triangular tour, Australia, Sri Lanka, and West Indies. Now, Australia got a man called Merriman, who was an ombudsman, and he became their manager. They wanted to do things. He did a lot of things. He taught the players that they should judge themselves. That, you know, if somebody had done something wrong, it would be a players' court, and they would find players, and they did that for Australia. The Sri Lankans had got one of these people from the hierarchy in a conglomerate, a tea conglomerate, and this did it. I was the manager of the greatest team on earth. And when I came back to Barbados, I had no job, just because I managed the best team in the world. That is something that you have to worry about, and players see that, and that happens. Now, as a selector, we try to play the team that is the best team for the match and for the series. Taking into account, it is a matter of meritocracy. it is not only that you have made 30 and I have made 28, so therefore you should play, but it has to do with, you know, what sort of demeanor has this man? You know, how is he as a team man? Would he be the type of person that we could invest in him and he becomes a team player and, you know, and still continue to produce regularly for the West Indies? Those are the sort of things that happen. Now, sometimes when you do that, insularity creeps in. And if he's a Guyanese, well, don't go to Georgetown. He's a Bajan, don't come to Bridgetown. And if he's a Jamaican, don't go to Kingston. I mean, not that you're going to be harmed, but sometimes there's a thing called psychological abuse. It is just like a man telling the woman that he marries that when I knew you, you were nobody, or you didn't come from anywhere. That is psychological abuse. It is just as bad to her mind and her psyche as if you had give her a slap. You know what I mean? And when you have insularity among West Indian cricketers, and you find that it is affecting the selectors because of the psychological abuse, I think that's a bad thing. In the end, I think the selectors have won out. They have picked the people who they thought, you know, should play, and it's all right. But you have to remember one thing. For 18 years, the West Indies team played 29 series without losing, and you never heard anybody give any praise to a selector. So, you know, it means that if you do, you're damned, and if you don't, you're not. So it's a hard job. I enjoyed it. I tried to make sure that whenever I picked a team, it meant that we had sat down conscientiously. We had looked about what was best for West Indies cricket and not for a particular island.
Wesley Hall, the Reverend Wesley Hall, thank you very much for speaking to us here on CaribNation, and good luck on your new career in the ministry.